I sat in the cold wooden chair of Courtroom 4B, listening to my mother tell a judge that I was mentally unstable and incapable of managing my own assets. She stood there in her designer suit, paid for by my secret dividends, with fake tears streaming down her face, claiming she needed conservatorship over my $20 million estate to protect me from myself. Her high-priced attorney, a man who charged $200 an hour, nodded solemnly, presenting fabricated medical records to prove I was unfit to own the very mansion I grew up in. My mother didn't know that for 3 years. I'd been playing a much larger game than she could imagine. She thought she was the hunter, using the legal system to strip me of my life's work. But as her lawyer stood up to deliver the closing argument, his phone buzzed with an emergency notification. He turned pale, his hands shaking as he read the screen. I leaned forward and whispered loud enough for only my mother to hear. "You should have checked the new ownership of this firm before you hired them. Mom, I don't just own the mansion as of 10 minutes ago. I own your lawyer, too." To understand why my mother was standing in a courtroom, trying to lobotomize my legal rights, you have to understand the history of the Sterling Vane family. Growing up, I wasn't a daughter to her. I was a biological insurance policy. My mother, Elena, was a woman who treated people like chess pieces and her children like pawns. My father had passed away when I was 12, leaving behind a massive estate and a set of airtight trusts that Elena couldn't touch until I reached 25. To her, those 13 years of waiting were an insult. She spent her days hosting charity galas on a dwindling allowance, smiling for the cameras, while privately seething that she had to ask a board of trustees for permission to buy a new Birkin. I was the difficult child because I saw through the facade, while my sister Clara played the part of the perfect debutante, spending her days at spas and her nights at clubs. I spent my time in the library, tucked away in the shadows of our drafty mansion. I didn't want the spotlight. I wanted the blueprint. By the time I was 16, I had realized that if I didn't build my own walls, Elena would eventually tear mine down to pay for her lifestyle. The betrayal began the summer I turned 18. Elena tried to convince me to sign a document that would give her limited power of attorney over my future inheritance, claiming it was for my protection in case I went away to university. I refused. That night, I heard her through the vents of our old home, speaking to a private doctor. She wasn't asking for medical advice. She was asking how much it would cost to diagnose a rebellious teenager with a chronic, debilitating mental condition. That was the moment I realized my mother didn't just want my money. She wanted my agency. She wanted me declared legally incompetent so she could remain the queen of the Sterling Vane estate forever. I didn't run away. Running away is for people who don't have a plan. Instead, I became a ghost in my own home. I played the part of the quiet, fragile daughter, while secretly funneling my small monthly allowance into high-risk, high-reward tech startups. I used a series of shell companies and offshore accounts that I had researched in those long nights in the library. While Elena was busy mentoring Clara on how to marry into more wealth, I was becoming a silent titan in the world of venture capital. I operated under the pseudonym V.E. Ritas, Latin for truth. By 21, I was worth more than the family estate 10 times over. I had built an empire of software patents and real estate holdings, all while living in a bedroom that smelled of mothballs and Elena's disappointment. I bought my mansion, a sprawling, $20 million architectural marvel on the coast under a corporate name. When I finally moved out, Elena laughed. She told me I would be crawling back within a month, begging for my trust fund. She didn't realize that the trust fund she was so obsessed with was now just pocket change to me. The escalation happened 6 months ago, when the family estate finally went into arrears. Elena had bled it dry through years of vanity projects and bad investments. She realized that I was the only thing left to harvest. She didn't know about my secret wealth at first, but she saw the coastal mansion and assumed I had stolen or manipulated my way into it. Her greed turned into a predatory obsession. She hired the most aggressive law firm in the state, Blackwood and Associates, to file for a forced conservatorship. She started a whisper campaign in our social circles, telling everyone that I had suffered a break from reality and was squandering family legacies on a house I couldn't afford. She thought she was being clever by hiring Blackwood. They were known for their scorched earth tactics. They were the firm that specialized in making children look insane to help their wealthy parents keep control. What Elena didn't know, what even the senior partners at Blackwood didn't know was that V.E. Rita's had been quietly buying up the firm's debt for the last 18 months. I had waited until they were over-leveraged from a failed merger, and then I moved in. 1 week before our court date, I finalized the acquisition. I didn't just buy a law firm. I bought my mother's weapon. I watched through the internal security feeds as Elena met with her lead attorney, Marcus Thorne, promising him a massive percentage of my estate if he won the case. I watched her smile, believing she finally had me cornered. She had spent 25 years trying to make me a prisoner of her will, never realizing that I had spent that same time becoming the person who owned the jail. The air in the courtroom felt stagnant, heavy with the scent of old paper and the sharp, clinical smell of my mother's expensive perfume. Elena sat at the petitioner's table, looking every bit the grieving, concerned mother. She had opted for a muted navy suit and a string of modest pearls, a costume designed to scream responsible. Guardian. Every few minutes, she would look over at me and let out a soft, performative sigh, dabbing at the corners of her eyes with a lace handkerchief. To the casual observer, she was a woman at her wit's end, trying to save her daughter from a mental breakdown. To me, she was a predator smelling blood in the water. Marcus Thorne, the lead counsel for Blackwood and Associates, stood before the judge with a predatory grace. He was a man who had built a career on destroying reputations, and he began his opening statement with the kind of calculated cruelty that had made his firm famous. He didn't just speak. He wove a narrative of a young woman who had disconnected from reality. He presented evidence of my erratic behavior, my sudden disappearance from social circles, my refusal to engage with family, and most damningly, the purchase of a $20 million mansion, despite having no discernible income. Your Honor, Thorne projected, his voice echoing off the high ceilings, we are looking at a classic case of grandiose delusions. My client's daughter has spent years isolating herself, and now she has somehow acquired a property that is far beyond the means of her established trust. We have medical testimonies from Dr. Holloway, a specialist who has observed the defendant, stating that she exhibits symptoms of a detached reality. Without a conservator to manage these assets, this young woman will not only bankrupt herself, but she remains a danger to her own stability. Elena let out a small, audible sob at that moment, timed with the precision of a stage actress. I watched her through narrowed eyes. Dr. Holloway was the same man I had heard her conspiring with years ago. He hadn't observed me. He had cashed a check. The medical records Thorne was currently handing to the judge were nothing more than expensive fiction, bound in leather and stamped with a fraudulent seal of authority. As the morning progressed, the attack intensified. Thorne called a series of witnesses, former household, staff who had been paid off by Elena to testify that I would talk to myself in the library or stare at walls for hours. They painted a picture of a girl who was a ghost, a shell of a person who needed a mother's firm hand to guide her. My own lawyer, a man I had hired specifically because he knew how to play the underdog role, remained remarkably quiet. He made small objections, but he allowed Thorne to build a mountain of lies. I could see the judge's expression softening toward Elena. The system was doing exactly what it was designed to do for the wealthy. It was favoring the person with the loudest voice and the most expensive representation. During the mid-morning recess, Elena cornered me in the hallway near the water fountain. The mask of the grieving mother dropped instantly. Her eyes were hard, shimmering with the triumph she felt was already hers. You could have made this easy, Sophia, she hissed, her voice a low venom. You could have signed the papers years ago. Now, I'm going to make sure the court sees you as a complete invalid. You'll live in that beautiful mansion. Yes, but you'll do it in a locked wing, and I will be the one holding the keys to the gate. You seem very confident, Mother, I said, my voice as flat and calm as a still lake. Aren't you worried about the truth coming out? She laughed, a sharp, cold sound that echoed off the marble walls. The truth is whatever I pay Marcus Thorne to say it is. I have the best law firm in the country, and they are hungry for the bonus I promised them once your estate is under my control. You're a child playing in a world of giants. You should have stayed in the library. I watched her walk back into the courtroom, her head held high, the victor in a war she thought was over. She didn't notice the subtle shift in the room when we returned. She didn't see Marcus Thorne's junior associate frantically whispering in his ear, or the way Thorne's face suddenly drained of color as he looked at his tablet. The judge took the bench, looking ready to deliver a preliminary ruling. Thorne stood up to give his final push, but his hands were trembling so violently that the papers in his grasp rattled. He had just received a notification that the firm's entire internal infrastructure had been updated, a new board of directors had been appointed, and a new conflict of interest policy had just been pushed through the system. "Mr. Thorne?" the judge asked, frowning. "You may proceed with your closing remarks regarding the medical necessity of the conservatorship." Thorne looked at me, then at Elena, then back at the screen of his tablet. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on a trapdoor. I sat back in my chair, crossing my legs, and offered my mother the first real smile I had given her in a decade. It was the smile of a landlord watching a tenant get evicted. The silence in courtroom 4B was no longer the heavy, respectful quiet of a legal proceeding. It was the suffocating stillness that precedes a total collapse. Marcus Thorne stood at the podium, his mouth hanging slightly open, looking like a man who had just seen a ghost on his computer screen. He wasn't looking at his notes anymore. He was staring at a high-priority, internal-only memorandum that had just bypassed every firewall in the Blackwood and Associates network. The memo was brief, cold, and legally absolute. Effective immediately. The firm has been acquired by Veritas Holdings. All pending litigation involving the Vane Sterling estate is to be frozen due to a catastrophic conflict of interest. Elena leaned forward, her pearls clicking against the edge of the table. "Marcus, what are you doing?" she hissed, her voice cracking the silence. "Finish it. Tell the judge about the delusions. Tell him she's unfit." Thorne didn't even look at her. His eyes were fixed on me, filled with a mixture of terror and realization. He turned toward the bench, his voice sounding like it was coming from the bottom of a deep well. "Your Honor, I must request an immediate stay of these proceedings. I have just been informed of a change in my firm's corporate structure that creates a terminal conflict of interest. I can no longer represent the petitioner in this matter." The judge's eyebrows shot up. "Mr. Thorne, you are in the middle of a closing argument. What could possibly be so urgent that it requires a stay right now?" "Your Honor," Thorne stammered, his face a ghostly white, "the firm, Blackwood and Associates, was acquired 10 minutes ago by a third-party holding company. The new owner of my firm is, in fact, the defendant sitting in this room." A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Elena's head whipped toward me, her eyes wide and bloodshot. "That's impossible," she shrieked, forgetting her grieving mother persona. "She doesn't have the money. She's a child. She lives on an allowance I give her." I didn't say a word. I simply signaled to my own attorney, who stood up with a calm, practiced ease. He didn't look like an underdog anymore. He looked like the executioner. He slid a tablet toward the judge's clerk. "Your Honor, we have submitted the certified articles of merger and the acquisition records. My client, under the corporate identity of V.E. Ritas, the sole owner of Veritas Holdings, purchased the majority debt of Blackwood and Associates 6 months ago and finalized the takeover this morning. As the owner of the firm, she cannot be sued by the firm. Furthermore, she has authorized me to release a set of internal billing records from Mr. Thorne's private server." "Internal records?" the judge asked, leaning forward with intense curiosity. "Yes, Your Honor," my lawyer continued, his voice echoing with authority. "Records that show a series of consultation fees paid by Elena Vane Sterling to Dr. Halloway, the medical witness for the prosecution, dating back 3 years. Records that include detailed instructions from Mrs. Vane Sterling to Mr. Thorne on how to manufacture a narrative of instability to bypass the trust restrictions." Elena's face transformed. The pearls, the navy suit, the fake tears, it all vanished, replaced by the raw, ugly snarl of a cornered animal. She lunged across the table, reaching for me, her nails like claws. "You little snake! You stole that money? That estate belongs to me. I raised you. I made you." Security moved in instantly, pinning her arms behind her back before she could reach me. The judge hammered his gavel with a force that sounded like a gunshot. "Order! Bailiffs, remove the petitioner!" "Mr. Thorne, sit down before I have you disbarred for fraud." I stood up slowly, smoothing the fabric of my blazer. I walked to the edge of the bar, looking directly into my mother's frantic, hateful eyes. The power had flipped so completely that the room seemed to tilt. She had spent a lifetime trying to prove I was unfit to own a mansion, never realizing that I had become the person who owned the very ground she stood on. The library was a great place to study, Mother, I whispered as the bailiffs began dragging her toward the door. But you were wrong about one thing. I didn't stay a child playing in a world of giants. I just bought the world the giants live in. The courtroom was no longer a place of deliberation. It had become a crime scene. Elena's screams of, "It's my money!" faded into the marble hallways as the bailiffs dragged her out. But the silence she left behind was even more devastating. Marcus Thorne sat at the petitioner's table, his head in his hands, knowing that his career was effectively over. The judge, a man who had seen decades of family greed, looked down at the documents my lawyer had provided with a mixture of disgust and grim fascination. The evidence wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a map of a decade-long conspiracy to commit identity, theft, and medical fraud. Mr. Thorne, the judge began, his voice like grinding stone. In light of the evidence suggesting that your firm knowingly facilitated the fabrication of medical records to subvert a legal trust, I am not only dismissing this petition with prejudice, but I am also referring this entire matter to the district attorney's office for immediate criminal investigation. Furthermore, I am issuing a bench warrant for Dr. Holloway on charges of perjury and falsifying medical documents. I stood perfectly still as the gavel fell. The sound echoed through my chest. The final heartbeat of the war Elena had started when I was 18. My lawyer leaned in, whispering that the V.E. Rita's identity was now public record in the court's filing, but I didn't care. The secret was out, and with it, the power Elena had used to keep me in the shadows was gone. Your Honor, my lawyer addressed the bench one last time. Given the severity of the fraud, we are also filing for an immediate permanent restraining order and a freeze on the remaining Vane Sterling family accounts to prevent further dissipation of assets. My client is also initiating a civil suit for the recovery of all funds misappropriated by the petitioner over the last 10 years. The judge nodded, his pen scratching across the order. Granted. This court will not be used as a tool for parental theft. As the hearing adjourned, I walked out of the courtroom and found my mother sitting on a wooden bench in the hallway, flanked by 2 officers. The navy suit was wrinkled and her hair, usually perfectly coiffed, was coming undone. She looked small. For the first time in my life, she didn't look like a giant. She looked like a tenant who had just been handed an eviction notice. "You think you've won!" she spat as I approached, her voice a ragged whisper. "You think owning a law firm makes you better than me? You're still just the strange little girl who spent her life hiding in a library. You're alone, Sophia. No one loves a monster who sues her own mother." "I didn't sue my mother," I said, looking down at her with a clarity that felt like ice. "I sued a predator who tried to steal my mind so she could keep her pearls. You weren't protecting me, Elena. You were harvesting me. And as for being alone, I've been alone since the night. I heard you buying a doctor to call me insane. The difference is, now I own the library, the mansion, and the firm that's going to make sure you never touch a cent of family money again." I pulled a single envelope from my bag and dropped it onto her lap. It was a formal notice of foreclosure on the family estate. "The trust is dry because of you. I've bought the debt on the old house, too. You have 48 hours to pack your things. I'd suggest you start with the pearls. You'll need them to pay your own legal fees, because Marcus Thorne certainly won't be helping you for free anymore." I turned my back on her before she could respond. The revenge glow wasn't a fire. It was a cold, steady light that finally illuminated the truth. She had spent my entire life trying to prove I was mentally unfit to lead, never realizing that my mind was the very thing that had built the cage she was now sitting in. The final echoes of the courtroom drama faded as I stepped out into the blinding coastal sunlight. For the first time in 25 years, the air didn't taste like my mother's expectations or the stale dust of a library where I had once hidden fear. It tasted like absolute, unyielding freedom. Within a week, the Vane Sterling scandal had dominated every social column, but not for the reasons Elena had hoped. The narrative had flipped. She was no longer the tragic mother, but the disgraced socialite facing a litany of fraud and embezzlement charges. Dr. Holloway's license was revoked within 48 hours, and Marcus Thorne's name was scrubbed from the building I now owned. I returned to my coastal mansion, the $20 million delusion that had started this war. I stood on the terrace watching the tide pull back from the jagged rocks below. The house was silent, but it wasn't the lonely silence Elena had predicted. It was the quiet of a fortress that had successfully held its ground. I had spent my life as a ghost in someone else's story, but today, I was the only author left. Elena's eviction was handled with the same cold efficiency she had once used to ignore me. She left the family estate with 3 suitcases and the realization that the pearls she wore were the only thing she truly owned. I didn't watch her leave. I didn't need to. The revenge glow wasn't about watching her suffer. It was about the moment I stopped caring if she was watching me at all. I opened my laptop and looked at the portfolio for Veritas Holdings. The firm was thriving. The legal industry was buzzing about its new ownership, and my sister, Clara, had already sent 3 emails begging for an allowance. I deleted them without reading. I leaned back, a glass of water in my hand. No champagne, no designer labels, just the clarity of a mind that everyone had tried to steal, yet no one could break. I wasn't the mentally unfit girl they had invented. I was the architect who had built a kingdom out of the bricks they threw at me. And for the first time, the view from the top was perfect.